I'm not looking to do a gotcha interview. I've absolutely no interest in doing that. I want all of the guests on my show to shine. I want to make them be the star. And so that way, if you're coming on my show, that's my goal.
This is April Cox. For those of you who don't know me, with Self-Publishing Made Simple, this Marketing Monday session we do for our mastermind group, and I opened it up for this session for anybody who wanted to join. I have a special guest speaker for you, Jed Doherty, and we're going to talk a little bit about podcasts and how podcasts can be used to help get the word out about your book. Jed, I met on, I am just so impressed with him. He interviewed me on his podcast, which is called Writing with Your Kids podcast. One thing that really stuck out with me with Jed is how tuned in he was as an interviewer. He did his research before every author, and he really does tune in and try to help you bring out the marketing value of your book. And because the podcast has such reach, I have also even advertised on his podcast to get information out about my programs and things like that. If you've never met Jed or you've never done anything on his podcast, I highly recommend. And he's also going to talk to us about some other things coming up. So I want to welcome Jed Ley. I'm so happy to have you here. Welcome.
Thank you, April. I'm really excited to be here, and I hope that check clears for all the very nice things that you said about me. As April said, I am the host of the Reading with Your Kids podcast. We have been publishing since 2017, and we are approaching episode 2000. And so we're real excited about that. This has been a joy for me. I launched the podcast in 2017 because I really wanted to share with parents how valuable it is to read with your kids. At that time, I knew that that if you read with your kids, that they would start to learn the basics of reading. And that was important. I had no idea of all the other amazing benefits reading with your kids gives to kids. But for me, the most important and valuable benefit of reading with your kids is the bond that happens between parent and child. And that's the message that I wanted to get out to families, is to spend that 20 minutes a day reading with your kids when they're young, continue to read with them as they go up through the middle grade ages and even as they're teens. I have two kids right now. They're both 27 and 30, and we're very, very close. And I know that relationship started and was built on a foundation of reading when they were young. And that is the message that we've been delivering. Our motto, our mission is that we want to help families grow closer through reading. And one of the things I want to say before I forget it is I want to thank all of you as you're writing, as your books are being out there, and as you're getting frustrated because you didn't realize when you started this that you had to be a marketer and a promoter and deal with advertising and all that other stuff. I want you to know that all the effort and the investment of time and money is worth it, because there are going to be hundreds, if not thousands, of families who are going to be curled up together, reading your book together and bringing them closer. So that's just a beautiful thing. So thank you so much for doing that for families. It's a really beautiful thing. And I don't know if authors take enough time to think about that. You know, podcasting, if you're not a podcast listener, podcasting has just simply exploded. When I launched this podcast back in 2017, there was maybe 100,000 podcasts worldwide, maybe. Now, especially after the pandemic, podcasting just exploded. There are over 2 million active podcasts available right now. And another statistic I found is that there's over 48 million podcast episodes out there. The interest in podcasts has just exploded. As I said, we're coming up on episode 2000 in June. it's just been an incredible journey. I did some research for the latest kind of demographics. In my podcast, authors get a chance to sit in a long form conversation of 20 to 30, 35 minutes to talk about a subject that they are the most knowledgeable of in the world. And that's your book. And we talk about what the book is, what the inspiration for the book is. I love to talk to authors about what kind of conversations they think that kids and parents can have. We talk about the benefits of reading books together. I know Victoria is here with us in addition to April. Both of them have been on the podcast. And I try to make it just a fun conversation between two friends who haven't met before. And everybody tells me that it's being on my podcast, it's a fun, easy experience. And the best thing is it doesn't cost a thing. Every continent on the planet, including Antarctica. And we're currently working on getting the podcast uploaded to the International Space Station. I don't know if that's going to work, but we just had an astronaut on. And so we're hoping that that's going to happen. Most podcast listeners fall into the 18 to 54 demographic age group. So lots of young people listening, lots of young parents are listening. The majority of listeners are under 34 years of age. That's like 48%. 32% of the listeners are 35 and 54. And then people like me over than 65, they come in at 20%. Podcast listeners tend to be very educated. The majority of listeners have at least a college degree, if not an advanced college degree. And they also are in the upper range of income. The average listener earns more than $75,000 a year. Most podcasters listen, 80% listen to podcasts on a weekly basis, at least one podcast. They're engaged. They listen, typically they'll listen to the entire episode. It might be hard to believe that someone's going to want to listen to you talk about your kid's book for 20 minutes, but it's true. People are interested. For example, with April, the little Labradoodle, but I remember we talked to April, we talked about what inspired you, the choice that you made to become a publisher, some other issues that led up to you publishing that book. And so it's, you don't realize how fascinating you are. And you really are, you have a lot to contribute, and a lot of people would be very interested in learning about you.
Just add also, Jed Ley, is that I think the surveys out there say over 80% of the people surveyed want to write a book, or they have that on their bucket list, or they have a book already penned that they would love to publish, but they're not doing it. So I think that also drives people to want to hear from people who have done it and understand what's involved and get a little bit of inspiration for themselves. So I think that does come into play as well.
Yeah, April, you're absolutely right. I know we have lots of authors and aspiring authors who are regular listeners to the show. So I think you're right. And hopefully a lot of those people who are listening are inspired to follow through and become a published author. We've had some incredible authors on the show. We've had LeVar Burton, other Hollywood stars like Candace Cameron Bure, Danica McKellar, Karen Parsons, Jasmine Simon. We've had New York Times bestselling authors like Katie Camello, Jane Yolen, Jerry Spinelli. I mean, the list just goes on and on and on. I am most proud of the fact that we are giving independent authors, self-published authors, a voice and a platform. Like I said, we've had 2,000, we're almost at episode 2,000. And I would say that at least 750 of those episodes, if not more, featured an independent author. And it's quite exciting to give a voice. I didn't set out to check all the boxes and have somebody from every part of the world and someone from every race and ethnicity, but that's happened. We talk a lot about representation on the podcast, and our past guest list is really representative of our whole entire human family. It's just been such a blessing for me.
What makes for a great podcast guest? What kinds of things can we do to prepare and be better guests ourselves?
Excellent, excellent question. I tell you one thing not to do. Don't send me a list of questions and then have the answers memorized, because I can tell and people can tell when somebody is reading an answer. It doesn't matter how good of an actor you are. It just doesn't work. I know, but public speaking is a fear that so many people have. That it's like the greatest fear some people have. Being on a podcast, I guess it is a little bit nerve-wracking, but it's different because you're actually only speaking to another person. Maybe there's two people, but it's basically a conversation between one or two people. And for me, I'm not looking to do a gotcha interview. I have absolutely no interest in doing that. I want all of the guests on my show to shine. I want to make them be the star. And so that way, if you're coming on my show, that's my goal. So I would say, relax, be prepared in terms of, I want to talk about my book. I want to talk about the inspiration, have that kind of stuff in the front of your mind, but also just kind of relax and be yourself and know that you're a very interesting person. Even if you don't think so right now, you really are. And you have a lot to offer to people.
The other thing that I know for myself when I was on with you, I can attest to the fact that I felt so comfortable, and your interview style brought out just, it set me at ease. I did feel like I was talking to a friend, and you brought out like positive things about my book. You had already knew all of that stuff, and you knew like how to prompt me to get to where we needed to go. So I think that makes for a really great podcaster, and I definitely appreciate that so much. So for authors who are thinking about using podcasts as a way of getting the message out about their books, is there any tips that you can offer? Because, getting on your podcast or pitching to other podcasters, how much lead time, what kinds of information is helpful to be able to get a foot in the door?
Excellent, excellent question. I do have a lot of folks who will reach out to me and they'll say, I have a book coming out next week. Can I be on your show? And it's like, yeah, but people aren't going to know about your book being out next week. It's, probably going to be 2 or 3 weeks before we can record. And then maybe 3 to 6 weeks before that recording is actually released. I would say if you have a book that's coming out and you reach out to me 6, 5, 4 months before it's going to be released, there's a good chance that you're going to be able to come on before your Kickstarter launches, come on before the book launches to, really get some interest in those first sale days. One of the neat things about a podcast is, at least with my podcast, it's evergreen. It's up there. If you wanted to listen to April on Reading with Your Kids, you can go to readingwithyourkids.com and click on our little podcast player there, and then go on the toolbar and just search out April M. Cox, and the episode will pop up. So it's out there. You can add a link to your website with your podcast appearance on my show, and people can click that and listen to it. It doesn't mess with the bandwidth of your website. You're not going to go over your data uses or anything like that because it plays from my podcast server. It's a wonderful thing to celebrate. They talk, if all you're doing on social media is saying, buy my book, buy my book, buy my book, people are getting very tired of that. Right. Whereas if you're on a podcast, it's like, you've already said buy my book, but now it's like, hey, I was just on a podcast, and you can listen to it here. One of the neat things I've seen a lot of people do is make a social media post saying, I have something in common with LeVar Burton. I was on the same podcast he was. And right. I think that's a really neat thing.
With regard to actually going through the process of planning ahead with you, so if it's like 3 or 4 months in advance, is it also the opportunity to say, hey, look, I'm launching on such and such a week. Could we plan it to go live during that launch week? Is that something you can do?
Absolutely. If you reach out to me 6 months in advance, that is absolutely something we could plan. In fact, Penguin Random House, and I get a dozen pitches from them every day, and I'm very grateful for that because it's a great way to bring attention to the Indian self-published authors. If they're going there to listen to LeVar Burton, it's like, well, I can also listen to Karen and Patricia and April. They came to me months ago. They have a book launching on next Tuesday. And they asked me if the author, Ellie Gilkison, who's a Christian recording artist, if we could release her episode this Thursday. And I actually just loaded it up to the distribution platform before we started this conversation. And that's another neat thing is if you know 6 months out, it's coming out for sure. And it's not going to be stuck on a boat coming from China, outside of Los Angeles. You reach out to me. We can even record months in advance to talk about the book and then have it sitting ready to go, which is what we did with Allie Gilkison. We recorded the podcast, I think, 2 months ago. In terms of pitching to me, I really, like I said, I get a dozen pitches from Penguin Random House literally every day. Macmillan, Holiday House, Candlewick, lots of indie authors. Concise is really appreciated. If you can tell me in a paragraph what your book is about, who you are, and why an audience would love to hear from you, those are golden. Okay. And if you can demonstrate to me that you can give me that information in a paragraph, then I know the chances are you're going to be able to communicate in a very concise and interesting way when you come on the podcast. One thing I will tell you not to do is please don't pitch to me or anybody else saying, "Hey, I love your podcast, the Reading with Your Kids podcast." And it becomes very clear that you haven't heard of me at all. You just found me on some base and you are writing it. Be sincere. If you have listened to the show, great. Hey, I listened to the show. I heard you speaking to April Cox. I thought it was great. I'd like to be on the show. This is the information about me. This is the information about the book. If you haven't heard the podcast, let them know, hey, I found you on Matchmaker. I found you on a database. My friend was a guest on your show and told me about you. But be honest. I typically, if I get something from somebody that I think is pulling my leg, I might say to them, "Oh, which episode did you like? And what date did it go out?"
If you were doing your own podcast, how often do you do them?
I publish 4 episodes a week. They're hour-long podcasts right now in April. And Victoria, we were doing 7 a week. We're doing a podcast daily. And those were typically one conversation with one guest. And each episode lasted about 20 to 25 minutes. We've since been picked up by a network of small radio stations across the country, the AM/FM 24/7 radio network. And so we needed to tweak our format a little bit. So we went to an hour-long format. And so now we will typically have 2 or 3 guests on the podcast, and we broadcast Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, and Sunday. How many you should do as a podcaster yourself? You need to sit down and ask yourself, how much time is it going to take me to do the podcast? How much time do I have to do the podcast? Am I going to have the guests? If I say I'm going to do 5 a week, am I going to be able to find 5 guests if you're having guests, or am I going to be able to create 5 episodes of content every single week?
And the production costs can get expensive too. So having a budget for that, unless you are someone that knows how to do it all yourself. And even with me and my YouTube channel, I am typically doing, once a week going live with my YouTube channel. So if I take any of that and I want to do production on it, editing, and then repost it somewhere, then that's going to, cost money for a video editor. And then there's all of the information to make sure that people can find you. So SEO, keywords, all of that stuff. I assume that still is something that is required also with podcasts. Is that right, Jen?
It is. I'll be very honest with you. I'm not the best at that.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not as knowledgeable with SEO and all of that as could be. I try to get the good keywords in there, and we've been fairly successful. We're certainly not the biggest podcast by any means, but we are in the top 1.5% worldwide. And we average between 1,000 and 2,000 downloads of every episode. The listeners on our radio network, it's insane. We're getting over 100,000 listeners each month. It's kind of mind blowing.
And it really just goes to show that podcasts, especially yours, but others as well, do have a reach and they do have an audience. And, when I think about for myself or other authors here, there are so many different topics for podcasts, reinventing your life after 50. That would be perfect for me because I left the corporate world and did some things. So I can be talking about my books and my how I've changed things. There's so many different topics and podcasts, homeschooling, mom's podcasts, all kinds of things. There's just no way to name it all. And so many out there that you have an opportunity to pitch to. What would you recommend with regard to pre-launch? How, do you think that putting multiple podcasts prior to launching a new book would be really helpful, Jed?
I think so. Yeah. One of the things I've heard recently is people buy your product or your service, your book, because they know you, they like you, and they trust you. And I think that's one of the things that a podcast can do is really give listeners a chance to get to know the person, see who they are, decide whether or not they like them, and decide whether or not they trust them.
So I see Denise also asked, what is the recommended length for a podcast?
That varies. I've done a lot of kind of searching out on this. I'm reading research that says a typical podcast is between 20 to 30 minutes in length. However, there are some very successful podcasts that are as short as 10 minutes. They tend to be kind of news headlines kind of things. And the most popular podcast in the world, which is Joe Rogan's show, and has 11 million downloads for every episode, that can go anywhere from 3 to 3.5 hours. Yeah. So there is no rhyme or, in terms of podcasting, there's no rules. The only rule is that it's your podcast and you can make up the rules.
It's funny. My chosen format is YouTube and, just doing YouTube, going live or doing YouTubes, that a lot of people are able to find me on that platform. So I've heard a lot of people say, gee, you've got all these episodes. It wouldn't be that difficult to turn it into a podcast. Is that true? Or should you really be focused on a podcast? And is it slightly different than doing things on YouTube?
My podcast can be listened to on YouTube. Every episode of my podcast goes up to YouTube. It can also be heard on Spotify, iHeartRadio, Amazon, Apple Podcast. I cannot tell you every podcasting app that we're on because I don't know them. I get messages every once in a while. Hey, you're on Ghana, which is the Spotify of India. Hey, you're on Himalaya, the Spotify of China. We just got uploaded to the Spotify of the Middle East, and I can't tell you the name of it because the logo is in Arabic letters, and I don't speak it. So the only thing that I would be concerned or the major thing I'd be concerned about as taking a YouTube video and turning it into an audio podcast would be the visual. Is the visual really important? Every once in a while, we'll have an author come on to my show, which is audio only, and we'll start showing pictures of the book to me. And then I'll say, oh, April is right now showing me a spread. It features her beautiful Labradoodle, and it's really cute. So that kind of thing, if there's something that's just a visual element on your YouTube show, you would have to go in there and kind of narrate that and tell the people what you were showing them.
Angela's got a question here. She says she's written several books on social emotional development and resiliency. Can you talk about more than one book with an episode, or do you have to stick with one?
No, you absolutely can talk about all your books, and we will do that very, very often, especially if you're talking about if books have kind of like a connecting link to them, and you talk these books are all social motion. Oh, well, tell us about your series and where does it start off, and this book talks about sadness and understanding emotion. This book talks about anxiety, and how can a family use the series to help their kids develop the emotional IQ, or EQ, as people say.
Karen says for his particular podcast, what does his ideal listener look like?
We know that most of our listeners are women, about 60%, which doesn't surprise me, because I think there are a lot of moms out there who are picking their books for their kids. Age is in the 32 to 40 range. I don't have any more information on, income or anything like that. But we do know that it's mostly women, mostly in that middle age range, or I guess that's not middle age anymore, but that 30 to 40 age range.
And obviously kids in that 4 to 8 or so, like reading type things. Or are you also serving people that are looking for books for older kids as well?
Absolutely. We introduce parents to authors of every genre of book, from board books to YA titles. We just featured an author that wrote a book called Solving the ADHD Riddle. So that was a book aimed at parents. We've also had some, I wouldn't call them controversial, but books that weren't written for kids, but I thought would be a really powerful experience for a teen and a parent to read or co-read together. The one that comes to mind is Barking to the Choir, that was written by Father Greg Boyle, who started Homeboy Industries, which is the largest gang intervention program in the world. The book, it's gritty. It's not language you would find in a preschool typically, but it's very powerful, and it had a great message of finding radical kinship, or, just radically being determined to find ways to feel like family with everyone you meet.
Tell me about your favorite interview that you've ever done.
LeVar Burton was incredibly cool. And my son called me one day early in 2018. So we're on for a year. And my son sends me a text. You should have LeVar Burton on your show. And I said, yeah, I should have $1 million in my bank account too, but neither one of those things going to happen anytime soon. And I just kind of joked and texted him back. And I sat and I thought, well, what the hell? I did some research. I found a website that seemed to be his. I sent them an email, and 3 days later, his wife wrote back to me and said, LeVar, I'd love to be on your show. And that was pretty cool, just having him agree to be on the show. When he was on the show, and I found this with a number of different guests, I realized, you folks probably don't know, I've done educational magic shows at schools for 35 years. So being on stage and performing, it's what I do. About 5 minutes into my conversation with LeVar Burton, it became very clear that we weren't doing a podcast. We were doing a performance. And it was so much fun because he was so great. And I remember this one specific question. I said, oh, LeVar, where does your passion for literacy come from? And he just, my mom, whatever her name was, I would see her read and I'm like, we could be on Broadway. I mean, it was just, and I loved it. And I've had that experience with a number of other guests, certainly a number of other actors turned authors who've been on, but also just, authors who are really comfortable with this, being in front of people. Kate DiCamillo was another wonderful guest. She's been on the show 3 times. And April, I have to be honest with you. You were very kind saying I did all this research. When Kate came on the show, I didn't know who she was. They sent me this media kit that was beautiful. I mean, it's just, and I was so busy, I didn't have time to even open it. And so I'm like, 10 minutes. I'm like, oh, I should probably take a look at this. And I open it up and I see she's the author of the Winn-Dixie movie.
Winn-Dixie?
Because yes. And I'm like, what? Oh, Mick, I got to get ready. So I did a lot of research in a very short period of time. And she was just great. And she was so kind. And she's been, like I said, she's been on 3 times. And every time it's, Jed, how are you doing? Nice to see you. And that's super wonderful.
I love it.
Jane Yolen was also a great guest. She's written over 400 books and all traditionally published. And she just shared some great wisdom for writers. She was talking about there's inspiration for stories. Everywhere you look, at every angle you're looking, there are dozens of stories that you can find. You just have to take the time to look for them.
Do you think that storytelling and practicing an elevator pitch and having some stories to tell are an important part of preparing for a podcast interview?
Absolutely. We know as authors, we know that storytelling is powerful. We know from watching TV that storytelling is powerful because we're watching TV for a story. I saw somebody said that they see LeVar every night on Star Trek: The Next Generation.
Yes.
That's, it's a classic story. And we know that it works because every 7 or 8 minutes, we see a commercial, which is a story about a product. And those advertisers are spending thousands, if not millions of dollars to tell you those stories because it's effective. And so absolutely, I think sharing about yourself, information that you're comfortable with is something that gives people a chance to get to know you. So I think that's wonderful. I'll share this. I have a lot of interns work with me from Emerson College here in Boston, which is a phenomenal college, especially for journalism and television production, movie, script writing, things like that. I was invited into a panel discussion. And when I arrived there, the other people in the panel were the largest employer in New England. And there was an Emerson grad who had just opened up something to do with Tesla in the Middle East. And I'm like, what am I doing with these people here? And the kids are asking them questions and they're rattling off facts and figures. And when they ask me questions, I am telling them a story. Well, this happened to me back and this happened to me. And at the end of the panel, I was the only one the kids came up and spoke to. And you had 3 interns join the podcast at the end of that night. So storytelling, as we say here in Boston, wicked, wicked important. And it'd be great to have some stories. I just thought, April, another thing, if you're on a podcast and you're having a conversation, it's really okay to ask the host a question. That's something that's happened. It doesn't happen very often, but it's something that often happens with those people who, like Jasmine Simon, who was in the HBO show Ballers and a number of other shows. Just tell me about your daughter. Oh yeah, because her book was about her daughter, and I said, oh yeah, my daughter. Well, tell me about her. What's she like? And that just really gets the rhythm going. And I love it. I love talking about myself. Obviously, I'm here, but I think audiences love it too.
Angela says, you're so eloquent and knowledgeable. Have you been interviewed for any podcasts? I'd love to listen if you have.
Angela, if you get in touch with me, I will find those and let you know where they are. We're actually, as we're approaching episode 2000, I have one of my interns working to get me on some more podcasts. So there'll be some new ones. But I do know I know the host is named George Monty, and he does a LinkedIn Live, which I also think is available as a podcast. Someone shared with me that they really enjoyed hearing my origin story on that podcast. So I'll see if we can find that for you, Angela.
As authors, if we're getting ready to launch our books, and maybe we've got some podcasts out there, or maybe we just didn't start early enough. Is there also an opportunity, or should authors consider doing like I did and actually sponsoring like one of your episodes or something like that to get the word out about their books, even though it might be too late to get on a podcast?
I think advertising is a great way to do it. We try to be as affordable as possible. One of the things that you've probably heard in different marketing classes is it takes somebody 7 times to hear your message before it kind of sinks in. This is a great way to do it. One of the things that we're doing right now is we offer different packages of promotion, and they'll be scheduled. So now someone will come on and they can buy 7 spots on the show, and it will air in 7 consecutive episodes. So the people who are listening hear it. The neat thing about my podcast is that it is evergreen. The podcast, the advertisements that you hear for authors within the show are there forever. So April,
awesome.
So and people are downloading the past episodes all the time. So the commercials that you bought to promote your writing class, they're still out there. People are still hearing them and listening to them, and hopefully checking out your website.
I know that you had mentioned there's other stuff that you're doing also to help with authors. Anything more that you'd like to cover as far as other ideas and ways that how can we help authors, and what new things are you working on?
Sure. Like I said, being a guest on the podcast, it's fun. It's easy. It doesn't cost you a thing. I'm going to share a couple of, I'm not going to mention any names, but there's been some publicists that I've dealt with in the past who have not been honest with people. There's one person in particular that was charging a really exorbitant rate and telling people that he had to pay me to get a guest on the show. And that was absolutely not true. Being a guest has always been free. And if someone is saying, give me $500-$700, which has happened, and I will introduce you to Jed, run away from that person as fast as you can. You don't need, it's just outrageous. We kind of launched our promotional services because of that. We wanted to offer some opportunities to get the word out for authors at a much lower cost. I'm hearing that publicists start at $4,000 with no guarantee of anything. This one particular publicist was writing 800-word pitch letters to me, and I wasn't even reading them. So please be careful when you do that. So we have a couple of things. Victoria, I know, who's here. At least 2 of her books, I think maybe 3 in her Tuxedo Baby series, are what we call our certified great read, a certified great read. We have a panel of teachers, teachers, parents, and kids. If they believe a book is worthy of 4 or 5 out of 5 stars, it becomes a certified great read. With that comes some great benefits. A fantastic review. The person who coordinates this program just writes the best reviews of all. We share those reviews to different book selling sites. Typically, they will publish the review. We don't have any control over that. We can submit it. We also create a video announcement for them, which some authors use as trailer. And that's all within a very affordable package. We're real excited. This summer, we had something called a Summer Scholar program, because I'm going to have a booth at the Uplift, I think that's the name of the convention, the Uplift convention in Nashville. There's going to be 3,800 educators there, all principals and school district leaders. So very the decision makers. They're going to be there. I think most of them are elementary school and middle school principals. We'll have a booth there. We'll have a limited number of books visible on our table at the event. We will be sharing printed material about each book. So it's a great way if you're looking to do sales to schools, if you're looking to do author visits to school. This is a great way to get your name in front of these decision makers. And that summer package comes with that visibility at that event, visibility to other book events, an marketing audit of your website, of your Amazon profile page, of your book description page, lots of insight and a review of what you're using already. We'll also be sending out press releases for you talking about your book. I forget the number. Be a part of the world's largest database of journalists and broadcasters in the world. We paid a lot of money to be part of that database, but it's something that an author by themselves could not justify spending the money to be part of that. But if we can help get a press release out to, a couple of hundred, couple of thousand journalists, people who are interested in children's literature, who've written about children's literature, covered it on the TV shows, if we can do that for an author for a couple of $100, we want to do that. We can justify it because we can spread the cost out amongst, maybe 100 different authors.
Where can people go to learn more about the different packages that you offer?
You can either reach out to me directly on my email or my son. My email is jedley, JEDLIE, at readingwithyourkids.com. And my son is Chris at readingwithyourkids.com. He's my promotion manager. A lot of you look like parents. It's so great when I hear back from people who've been on the show, who are interested in this particular, especially the summer package. They speak to him and they send me a note saying, your son is so nice. It was so lovely to speak to him. And I just really love it. And I wasn't able to afford the big thing, but he gave me something and I'm really happy with it. And so please, either one of us, we would love to be able to help you out. And I think somebody said that they wanted to know where they could find the past episodes. And that's easy. Readingwithyourkids.com. When you arrive on the splash page, the home page, you scroll down a little bit and there's a big player. Mm-hmm. You hit the player, that'll take you to another page. And there's a toolbar there that you can search LeVar Burton, Candace Cameron Bure, any April Cox, Victoria. Just check it out that way. I think somebody asked, I think you asked me, April, with all those people.
Oh yeah. How do you sift through all of those? Yes.
A concise subject line is really helpful. I would tell everybody here, you can send me a pitch to Jed Ley at readingwithyourkids.com. If you put in the subject, I heard you with April Cox, that gets opened up immediately.
I love that. That is awesome. I love that. And I actually have an idea that I'll circle back with you on for advertising that I'd like to do myself and on behalf of my authors. So I would love to be able to chat with you further.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I see somebody's asking, would you do a podcast on a book that has been self-published 6 months ago? Yes. 6 months ago, a year ago, 2 years. You're selling a product. And while it really helps to be out there and have your book promoted right at the launch, you don't stop selling your book after it launched. You just keep grinding and putting it out there. And I know Dan Brown, who wrote Da Vinci Code, his first 3 books sold nothing. And then Da Vinci Code hit. That was a huge hit. And then everybody started buying the 3 books that he wrote beforehand that nobody bought before. So yeah, so absolutely. If you have a book, it's 6 months old, a year old, whatever, send a pitch, make it concise. Let me know that you heard me here with April, and we'll check it out.
Because you do so much at these different events, Jed, are there any that you would recommend that authors seriously consider attending themselves?
I did. I think one that I would absolutely encourage people to do would be the North Carolina Reading Association Annual Conference. That happens in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. The booths are not that expensive. We're talking hundreds of dollars as opposed to thousands. And there are lots of teachers there, lots of parents that are just love reading. So I thought that was a really great event. I've also been out to the Orange County Children's Book Festival. It's amazing to go there. It's kind of pricey. I think a booth is $600 to $700. They do have author tables where you're sharing a tent with a bunch of different authors, but that usually sells out really quick. But that attracts about 40,000 people to the event. It's a massive event right outside of Los Angeles. I would say any book event in your local area would be neat. And also, one of the things we do is we will partner oftentimes and kind of borrow someone's audience, like a zoo or a museum. And I'm able to offer a zoo or museum a performance of my magic show. I'll come down and do a magic show. You let me set up a booth and promote these books. So that's, a neat thing. If there's an author that has a STEM related book, maybe going to a children's museum and saying, hey, I can do this experiment for you and it's interactive and kids can go home with, or if you have a picture book, kids can go home with coloring pages. That might be a neat way. And again, an inexpensive, if not free way to go out and promote your book.
Are you doing anything with some of the librarian conferences or teacher conferences, things like that?
I'm looking at a teachers conference, a national teachers conference that's coming to Boston. Those tend to be very expensive. The Nashville event is close to, it is $3,000 just for the booth. Yeah, it would be hard to sell that many books to justify.
Yeah.
And at your table. But again, it's hard to justify as an author of one children's book to spend that kind of money. But if you're sharing a table with me and there's 10 or 12 authors there, you're paying a little bit of that entire cost.
For people that aren't already on your mailing list, it sounds like it'd be a great idea to go and join your mailing list, sign up to get notifications of these events you're going to be at and the different things that you're offering. So I do highly recommend that to folks here. And if you love podcasts, and even if you've never listened to a podcast, go check out Jed Ley and everything that he's doing there, because you will not be disappointed. They're just a lot. Even if you're just looking for ideas of what kinds of things are people asked at podcasts, and how can you represent yourself well, or how can you interview others? I actually had one of my authors who, during the launch of her book, decided she was going to do some interviews, and she went live and she interviewed me. She interviewed her editor. She interviewed other people that all had a part in her book, and she thanked them and she interviewed them too. And it was just really a lot of fun seeing everything that went into the book. So she got an opportunity to educate, to thank people, and to really use that as a way of getting the word out about her book launch. So these kinds of things are always helpful.
Yes, absolutely. We're really lucky that we're in an age where we have access to social media, we have access to podcasts, a lot of avenues that are free. Mm-hmm. And it's not like going to Amazon and, gee, how much do I have to invest in Amazon ads, which I don't know how many people are going to actually see them.
Well, thank you. I want to be respectful of your time, Jed. So thank you so much for being here. And I look forward to seeing what you're doing out there with authors and joining you for some of these events and advertising and things like that. So I'm also creating a page of recommended resources, and you are definitely going to be on the top of the list when it comes to podcasts, and the Great Read program that you do, I think, is absolutely phenomenal. So thank you for that, and for all that you're doing to help authors elevate their stories and reach more families.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate it. I appreciate what you're doing for authors. And again, thanks to everybody who is out there writing children's books, because you are making a difference in the lives of kids and families. So thank you. Thank you all for listening.